right. And we're back, everybody. Sorry, I was listening to myself in French. I sounded amazing. Thank you, everybody, for staying, and I hope you've had a productive feedback session. I forgot to, even though Patricia told me multiple times to announce it, but we have links. Actually, if you look at the chat, Patricia has posted both English and Spanish versions of the feedback form. So if you weren't using them before, you can use them now for your second session, okay? Feedback givers, heads up, they are in the chat. If you scroll up a little bit, you can download the forms. Courtesy of Colab, by the way. Should always thank them for that. All right, and now for our second presentation of the afternoon with our lovely Tamber Hilton.
Présentation avec Tamber Hilton.
I'm getting audio. Please mute your mics on Zoom. Thank you, Mihai. So going back then, yes, we have Tamber Hilton. Tamber, is your camera on? Ah, there you go. There she is. Hello, Tamber.
Hello.
Thank you very much for being with us again. Thank you very much for talking about what you do today. Let me read your mini bio here. So heads up for the interpreters. I'm about to start reading. Tamber is an immigration lawyer, a federally certified freelance Spanish court and community interpreter, and a tech and audio aficionado. Actually, if you've checked YouTube for the videos of which microphone to use in your booth and you found out wonderful microphones, that is her fault. Thank you very much for that, by the way. Changed a lot of lives. Tamber has spent 6 years working in refugee resettlement in Tucson, Arizona. Sorry, I pronounced that very wrong the first time. And earlier in Bangkok, Thailand, where she ran the Interpreter Services Program for the US Resettlement Support Center. She has also completed a Master of Studies, an MST, in International Human Rights Law at the University of Oxford. She also works at T.E.A Solutions, where she works hard together with her also amazing colleagues, Aimee Benavides and Ernest Niño-Murcia, to help people look and sound their professional best virtually. So a woman of many skills and a woman of many hats here to talk to us today. And Tamber, you have the floor. Take it away. And thank you very much once again for helping us practice.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Y primero, antes que nada, quería agradecerle a Natalie. Esta ponencia va a ser en inglés, pero quería agradecerle a Natalie porque realmente me encantó tu charla. Y pues estaremos en contacto, espero, porque realmente siento que estamos trabajando en la misma causa, aunque en diferentes lados de la frontera. So, as Daniel said, I'm an immigration lawyer. I live in Tucson, Arizona. So what I'm going to be talking about today is mostly about the legal side of things here and what people encounter when they first cross the border. So I'm going to be focusing on specifically just what happens when people reach the Arizona border, because that's what I know best. This is actually part of a longer 3-hour immigration seminar, which, if you want to see it, will be on November 12th at the University of Arizona at the National Center for Interpretation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to bring that up right now. Okay, there we go. So kind of like how Natalie was saying, like all of us are migrants. We've all gone from place to place, even if it's just from one town to the next. It is one of the defining features, I think, of human existence. And sometimes it gets complicated when you cross borders. And so that's what I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to present it to you a bit as kind of a story. I want to introduce you to our participants in our story. Our guests today are Tatiana. She's got a baby boy, Alexis. She has a preteen daughter, Marcela. And Tatiana is also coming with her sister, Alanis. Marcela stays behind with her grandmother, and Andres is, out of the picture, but 3 hours from now, we would talk about them maybe. So not today. On the government side, we also have some important players. The major agencies involved here, and this is sort of the alphabet soup, right? The major agencies involved here are the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, Immigration and Customs Enforcement under DHS. So Department of Homeland Security is actually a large umbrella agency, and under it are like 15 other agencies. So I'm just talking about the immigration ones. So Immigration Customs Enforcement, US Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, Customs and Border Patrol, CBP. Under them, Border Patrol, which I found out by accident one time because I was calling a CBP station and the guy got very huffy with me. He's like, Border Patrol is a different agency, ma'am. So I found that out. One wears blue uniforms, one wears green. We also have Homeland Security investigations. They're sometimes involved, but tangentially, when someone comes to the border suspected of terrorist stuff or crimes. I actually had a client who I don't think really was a terrorist or criminal or anything, but she had some unfortunate associations in her past, I think, and they gave her the 3rd degree at the border. That says HIS, it's actually HSI. So they can be sometimes involved. Department of Justice, a separate agency entirely. So also under the executive, so under the President of the United States, that you have the Department of Justice. And they also do a lot of different things, like the FBI is under them, and as the National Law Enforcement Agency. But for our purposes, we're interested in the Executive Office for Immigration Review, commonly known as Immigration Court. But under the Executive Office for Immigration Review, we have both the Immigration Court and the appellate body. So if a decision doesn't go your way in Immigration Court, you appeal it to the Board of Immigration Appeals, the BIA. After that, you may be able to appeal your case to the circuit courts of appeals. We skip like the district courts, we go straight to the circuit courts. And so that's why I mentioned the federal judiciary as also a major player, even though they're not actually an agency. So I'll go to my next slide. So our story begins in Yuma, because that is where so many of my clients cross. Tatiana, Alanis, and baby Alexis arrive in San Luis, Arizona, fleeing from persecution in Colombia. Right now, people can't just cross a bridge. Before the pandemic, kind of before Trump, a little bit during Trump, you could still cross at the point of entry. But since Title 42 is enacted in March 2020, which is kind of a, I mean, my bias is going to show, I think it was repurposed malevolently. So as a public, it's like a public health provision, but basically the effect of it is to push everyone back. And you can see the cynicism now because pandemic's basically over. We hardly wear masks in the US now, and most everything's back to normal, but yet Title 42 is continuing to be pretty ruthlessly enforced. And now it's being, like, as of like last week, it's being enforced against Venezuelans. So this is, everything's changing. Everything changes very quickly at the border. But Title 42 has been kind of a constant thorn in our sides for a couple of years now. And so Tatiana and Lanis don't go to a point of entry. They sneak into the US, but just barely cross the border. That's what everybody does. Just barely cross the border and then sit and wait for Border Patrol to come pick them up. So the first agency that they encounter is, in fact, Border Patrol. I've got some images here. That's a Border Patrol officer with his green uniform. And these are some images I found on the internet of the Yuma processing site. At this point, they're like basically incommunicado. They can't reach their families. They can't contact lawyers. There's very little that a lawyer can do. There are some things that I can do, but not a lot. From here, what Border Patrol is going to do is make a decision to release someone on parole, which is pretty good. It kind of erases the illegal entry in a way. Own recognizance. So that just means your personal promise to come back to court and do the things. They may apply Title 42. They might place someone in what's called expedited removal proceedings, or they may leave some of these decisions to ICE. My opinion is that I think Border Patrol pretty much does it. It's very opaque. And it probably depends a lot on kind of like what the local policy is in each at each border station. But what I see is that people seem to come to ICE if they get transferred to ICE, which is the detention, like longer term detention where people can call their families and go to court and stuff like that. If they get transferred to ICE, they come with kind of their destiny already set in stone. And it's really random. Like there is no, I always tell my clients, it's nothing that your family member did. It's nothing about who they are. It's who they got that day and what the bed space was like, how much room there was for people. That's why it happened in this way. There is no like rhyme or reason really as to why one of these would be applied. In our case, neither Tatiana nor Alanis are subjected to Title 42. So they stay in the US for now. Because Tatiana came with a baby and because there's been a lot of litigation about family detention. And the result is that people like her are not usually detained for very long at all. So she's quickly paroled into the US. She gets what's called a Form I-385. That's not what everybody gets. Like, again, like the border is not uniform. So some people will get different paperwork. But in her case, let's just say she gets a Form I-385. It's basically just a identification document with her biographical information. And she is released into the United States. She's taken to a migrant shelter in Tucson, Casalitas. That's my migrant shelter where I volunteer. And volunteers help her travel to her family in New Jersey. So let's find out what happened to Alanis, though. Alanis is a single woman with no children. So Border Patrol considers sending her back through Title 42, but there's no space on the plane. Seriously, this really has happened. Like so many times my clients have been like, they were going to put me on the plane. They told me they were going to put me on the plane. And then they said there wasn't space. Like, how lucky were you? That's happened to me at least twice. So there's no space, but ICE has bed space at Eloy Detention Center. So, and I kind of want to make the side note that you may have heard of the migrant protection protocols. This is a program that was enacted before the pandemic by the Trump administration to make people wait in Mexico, the famous Quédate en México or Remain in Mexico program. And they would do their asylum case there. And it was incredibly inhumane for a lot of reasons and dangerous. It was killed by the Biden administration and then revived after litigation in a Texas court. And then like basically the Supreme Court made it basically, without going into it, vacated an injunction. And now the program is over. So hopefully it stays over. People are coming into the United States now and not being required to wait in Mexico. However, Alanis is still placed in expedited removal proceedings. These are also known as 235 proceedings. It's an extraordinary proceeding that we can just basically be returned very quickly. And she's transferred to ICE custody about 10 days. So she waited with Border Patrol about 10 days after she initially crossed. Because she told the Border Patrol agent she was afraid to return, a lot of people do, she's not going to actually be sent back quickly. She will have to pass a credible fear interview. And that's sort of a barrier that they throw up to applying for asylum. Like, we want to make sure you have a real case. It's a low threshold that people have to pass, but nevertheless, it trips a lot of people up, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes just because it's not fair. So ICE will refer her case to USCIS, one of those agencies, and USCIS, an asylum officer, will interview her. And I want to make the point here that if people have actually come to the US before and been ordered removed or removed through expedited removal prior, so like a lot of people try more than once, the second time that they come back, it's actually going to be what's called a reasonable fear interview. So CFI versus an RFI. It's the same interview, but it's harder to pass the RFI. The standard, we say, is higher. So let me kind of explain that a little bit. This is what they're looking for in that credible fear interview. So a first-time arrival gets this credible fear interview, and it's looking for basically the definition of a refugee: past persecution or a well-founded fear of future persecution on account of, so that, like, the reason of the person's race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So the standard of proof is a significant possibility that you can establish a reasonable possibility that you will face persecution on the basis of one of these grounds, right? They also screen for torture. And then it's, again, a significant possibility that it's more likely than not you'll be tortured in your home country. So if you, however, if you had a prior removal order, like I said, you will have to prove the same things, but then the standard of proof is not a significant possibility anymore. It's a reasonable possibility. So they go straight to the asylum standard of proof, reasonable possibility that you will face persecution. So like the CFI is a little bit easier to pass, but the RFI is almost the same as an asylum interview in some ways. So this credible fear interview is usually the one that Alanis is going to go through. It's her first time in the US. So she's going to have a 1 to 3 hour interview. It's going to be over the phone. It's not usually in a very private space. Like I've been at the detention center and I can hear other people having their credible fear interviews in these completely not soundproof cabins. There's an interpreter present over the phone. And if the person can manage it, an attorney. So there's a lot of documentation that the interpreter will be asked to sight translate during that interview, and they usually have it in advance. And basically, the officer will question the person through the interpreter. So I'm going to skip over the next slide. Unfortunately, Alanis did not pass her credible fear interview on her first time. So her sister, because remember Tatiana is out, and Tatiana's doing amazing things, trying to survive, raise her kid, and look out for her sister. Very common. So the sister hired an attorney, and the attorney filed what's called a request for review with the asylum office. And that attorney got in there, prepared her, had only 7 days to do it. This is a lot of work for an attorney. 7 days, prepared her, submitted a brief and a declaration to the immigration court for her credible fear review hearing. Not all lawyers do like a whole brief and a declaration because we really do only have 7 days. So it's not always possible to do all that. And sometimes all the attorney does is show up. In this case, the IJ immigration judge, reversed the negative credible fear finding. And then ICE filed again, like the charging document, the notice to appear in her case. And that transferred her from 235 proceedings to regular 240 proceedings. ICE ended up giving Alanis a bond of $3,000, which is actually legally incorrect. They should parole her, but sometimes they used to give bonds. And now they exclusively parole, and there's been some litigation that has empowered ICE to kind of feel like they can keep people detained for longer. So that's, again, things change very quickly. It's only been a couple months like that. So at this point, nowadays, ICE would, since the last 2 months, would definitely not give Alanis a bond. They might parole her, or they might just detain her. And because she went through the credible fear process, she would not ever have a right at this point, based on current litigation. She would not have a right to ask for, oh, that's my robot. I'm so sorry. That's so loud. I'm going to turn it off. Right now, Alanis would not have the opportunity to go before an immigration judge and ask for bond, and she would have to fight her asylum case while detained. But let's assume she got paroled. This is kind of where I'm going to end. Once people are released from detention, ICE will place them under some kind of supervision. So they call it alternatives to detention, and it's either run directly by ICE or by a private contractor called ISAP, the Intensive Supervision Appearance Program. They may have an ankle bracelet. They may have a phone that they have to, take pictures of themselves on, like Tuesday. And they will go through this until they've reported often enough that they're released from the program. Like ICE has decided that they comply. Since Alanis has a bond, she's just told to report. And she actually already had her first court hearing. We call it a master calendar hearing. It's like just a preliminary hearing while she was detained. So she had her first hearing already. Tatiana, on the other hand, also received her notice to appear, but when she went to a check-in. So she was released with the 385, processed very quickly, wasn't even given a notice to appear. And then she got her charging document or her notice to go to court at her first check-in. So I will stop the share right here. So you guys do have the slides. So there's like, if you want to continue the rest of the story, or on November 12th, you can join me. So I will hand it back over to Daniel.
Wow. Holy crap. That is a lot of acronyms. It is incredible how much these immigrants have to go through. First of all, thank you very much, Tamber, for the presentation. That was awesome. I have a couple of questions, and then again, I repeat I know that it's difficult to think of questions while you're listening to your colleague and or interpreting, but if you find the time to ask any questions, just write them in chat or ask to participate with the raised hand, and we can give you the floor. I have a couple of more philosophical questions and a couple of practical ones. So maybe let's start with the practical one. So I think that's easier to get them over with. Once you said that Tatiana, after the whole process, uses an ankle bracelet, and with the majority of cases, once people are paroled and they're gotten into the system, what is the usual outcome? Most of these people get to stay in America, the people who went through the CFR or the RFR, and they manage to stay and have a relatively stable life in America. Do most of them get to stay in America, or is it the most common result that they have to return at some point?
Well, so let me start with statistics. I think that nationally, so most people are going to be applying for asylum. Most people do not have relief other than asylum when they come. It's pretty much their only option because most people don't have family-based, they don't have a citizen spouse in the US, for example. If they did, they would have come another way. Although that sometimes does happen. I'm like, you crazy, why did you do that? So usually it's going to be asylum. So if we start with that, then we know that about 50% of cases, and this is an average, okay? Because if you go to Georgia, you're like 90, or in my city, you're like 97% likely to get denied. Whereas you're like 60% likely to get, or 40%, at least there's a 40% denial rate in like San Francisco, or, it varies a lot by court. So when my clients are like, we're moving to New York, I'm like, great, do that. So, but like on average across the US, it's about 50%. So the other 50% are going to get ordered removed. Now, people sometimes acquire relief while they're here because their cases take so long. And things happen and the government dismisses their case. About 65,000 cases, I think this year or in the last couple of years have been thrown out just because the government didn't file the right paperwork and they're super overwhelmed. I talked to someone yesterday who I looked up his case and I was like, oh, you're one of the lucky ones. I think your case was thrown out by the judge because the government didn't file. It was the first one I'd seen, although I've heard of it. But long story short, a lot of people, they will get ordered removed. Whether they stay or whether they actually leave or not is another question. Some people stay anyway, despite the consequences, and eventually figure something out later in their lives. But most people are not going to, I wouldn't say that most are going to end up with a stable life. Also, it takes a really long time to get asylum. It can take in the best of cases, a year or two. And in the worst, it can take 5 to 10 years.
5 to 10 years. Wow. Okay. Now one of the more philosophical ones. I was talking about this very briefly when Natalie was finishing her presentation. As an immigrant myself, but going through the nice little process where everything was legal and everything was much easier because I immigrated in much more privileged circumstances. I still feel that the country treats you like the country is doing you a favor, a huge favor. It's out of the kindness of the heart of the receiving country, when it's much more likely the opposite. Like, I come here and I do nothing but dump tax money into the country. Meanwhile, Brazil had to pay to educate me, to make me born, to raise me, to feed me, to give me everything, that I just come here and start immediately producing income for another country. I am a bargain for Spain, which is where I live. And I would really, really love to see an example of any country looking at things differently. I think Canada treats it a little better officially, but it's always this horrible feeling that, well, you depend on our benevolence. Have you ever seen any example of that not happening in your line of work?
It just depends on the people. Like, it comes down to people, and kind of understanding and awareness. Like, I think that worldwide that there's just this perception, and it's mistaken, of course, that this idea that this country that we drew a line around is like the same as our house. And if you want to come into it, it's like you're coming into our house. No, it's not the same as your house. It's like a space that we can all share. And I agree with you that, like, most of the time, immigrants and refugees are actually providing a service. They are often very entrepreneurial, because they're especially the ones that kind of migrate irregularly and take these risks. And refugees, they're survivors, and they're creative and they're resourceful. They are the most resourceful people I have met. Like, I'm just kind of blown away, like, how much they do with very little, and they start businesses and they just figure it out. I'm like, how did you do that? How did you know that? How did you manage that? And so they do contribute a lot to the country. And I think, just like on a statistical level, I think if you just look at it from a pure economic standpoint, immigration is usually good for economies. Sometimes it can create losers within economies. And I have to acknowledge that at the margins, because there are Americans at the margins, there are Spaniards at the margins, and they're going to find themselves in competition with new arrivals. And so that's real, and that creates a lot of resentment. But on the whole, I think it's better for countries. It makes them more interesting places. But again, everybody has, it's hard to overcome kind of xenophobia and just like fear of, like, what are they going to take that's mine? Are they going to, or even intangible things, my culture is going to change. That it's hard to kind of like balance all of those feelings within a country and a community.
Absolutely. Yeah. Completely agreed. And man, I hope this changes someday. I have little expectation, but I have a lot of hope. Good luck for the interpreters to get this one right, because it's the same word in so many languages, hope and expect. Anyway, sorry, one question from Elena in chat. She's asking if you could tell us again where we can find that seminar that you told us about at the beginning. National
Center for Interpretation, U of A. I actually, I just direct messaged Luce. Sorry. There we go. National Center for Interpretation at the University of Arizona. I can give the chat. I can find the link and give it to Daniel. I think if you Google me, it will actually come up, because they've already posted it. Yeah, I'd love to see you guys there. It's a fun seminar for me to give. I tell the whole story and we talk about it, and yeah. Oh, that would be awesome to attend. There's a lot that comes up when you Googled, actually. So definitely find it, because you wear all of those hats, and I don't know if you've Googled yourself without you logged in, but it's all over the place. Oh, okay. Rebecca has the link. Yeah, look, she just found it. Okay. Tamber, thank you so much once again. This was amazing. Thank you very much for sharing your experience, for sharing the process that these immigrants go through. We're going to have a quick break now for the interpreters to give each other feedback on their performance and to talk about everything. And we'll go back later for a general discussion. You're welcome to stay if you want, of course, but as far, I know you have to go through your day as well. So if you have to leave, that's not a problem at all. But once again, thank you so much. This was amazing. Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. And it was also really great again to hear from Natalie and her experience. So really grateful to have been invited. And I'm actually going to bid you guys farewell. But have a wonderful day, and it's great to be here.
Absolutely. Hope you interpret for us at some point in the future.
Oh, I should.
Well, I'll put you on the mailing list. Thank you, Tamber.